Hello, BookTube. I mentioned earlier today in a tag video that my day might involve a car, that it might involve an adventure. One of my muscular teenagers, the only one who's still in town, has a friend that's been visiting regularly who comes in a car and who has therefore a car at our disposal. Sure enough, it turned out earlier today that he texted me and said, would we got the car? You want to go somewhere? Um, And I said yes because I've been feeling down in the dumps. And he and his friend showed up, and I piled into the car. I settled Malin Moore first so that she wasn't going to miss me. Uh, and I was just looking out the window. I was chatting with them. I'm starting to know his friend a little better. Uh, and we were driving. We were on the highway, and we pulled into a place. And it was the first time that I paid attention to where we were going. And it was a big old used bookstore, and I was amazed. And I turned to them both, and I said, "What on earth are we doing here? Why would you two want to go to a used bookstore?" Uh, and my boy said, "Well, dude, you seem kind of down. Thought this might cheer you up." So I hugged both of them for a good long time, and then they pulled away from me, and they both yelled, "Yay!" uh, uh, and we went inside. And many adventures followed after that. We went out to eat, and we went to the water. Uh, but it turns out, because of that gesture, that I have books to show you. I have books to talk about, even on a bleak and barren Sunday. I must admit, uh, little moments like that can change any day from bleak and barren into bright and bouncy. So I want to show you these and talk about them a bit. And the first one is this. It's Dwayne's Depressed by Larry McMurtry. It's the final volume in his series set in Thalia, Texas. And it stars Dwayne Moore, who in this novel he's old. He's in his 60s, and he's buffeted by sudden events in his life. And as the title gives you an idea, they depress him. They knock him off his pins. The title is ridiculous. I once again reiterate to the publishing world that my services are available 24 hours a day for free to come up with a great title for your book. All of my titles will be great. Yours, Metza Metza. I got this because it's a UK trade paperback, and I have a soft spot for them. And it was almost nothing. It was almost free, but I shouldn't have done it because the Thalia novels are coming out in a beautiful one volume collected hardcover in just a little bit. It'll only be days before I get that. And I don't need this at all. I'm not certainly going to read a trade paperback just because it was made in the UK. So this is one of those rare instances where I grabbed this thing, I shoved it into a bag, I bought it without thinking about it, but it will immediately go into the Brattle resale pile. Uh, but the next one, not so much. The next one is by John Mortimer. It's a hardcover of Rumpole of the Bailey, and this is the Rumpole and the Penge Bungalow Murders, in which I love these Rumpole hardcovers, these standalone novels that he did, that Mortimer did. I'm very glad that he did them. I mean, Rumpole, of course, was forever and ever the subject of short stories. I'm very glad that Mortimer was able to do uh, 4 or 5 Rumpole novels. And this one, as you can tell from the title, those of you, I don't imagine any of you know anything about Rumpole of the Bailey. But when we meet Rumpole in the short stories and in the famous TV show, he is an Old Bailey hack. Emphasis on the old. But once upon a time, his career looked more promising than that, especially at its highlight, the Penge Bungalow Murders, which he won alone and without a victor in criminal court, that established his career and placed his name in the notable British trials. And this book finally, after decades of illusions, this book finally tells that story, the story of that trial. And I have the Penguin trade paperback, but now I have the hardcover, and I couldn't be happier about it. And the next one, also a wonderful find. It's a folio edition. The Folio Society makes these beautiful sewn binding, acid-free pages, original illustrations of classics that they pick according to their own idiosyncratic fashion. And this is Love in a Cold Climate. by Nancy Mitford, with an introduction by Pauline Tennant, and illustrations by Roland Pym. And this is Mitford's. It's sort of kind of an ideological sequel to The Pursuit of Love, which she brought out in 1945, and it sold like griddle cakes. It made her, it put her on the map. She was a practiced novelist before then, but with Pursuit of Love, she tried something different. She tried the full on Brideshead Revisited, and it worked perfectly. It was just what readers in 1945 Britain wanted to read, and she followed that up in 1949 with Love in a Cold Climate, which is more of Rolls Royces and gravel driveways and mansions and rich people, and it's Tennant refers to it in her introduction as light as a souffle, and that's true. It is, but Nancy Mitford is one of those authors that whose real brilliance you appreciate a little more the more you read her. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that those journeyman novels that started her career, I think she wrote 3 or 4 of them before she wrote The Pursuit of Love. I'd be willing to bet those novels would actually stand up very well to a rereading. I'm going to keep an eye out for Mitford. But the Folio Societies, the reason that I don't have, they're so beautiful, the reason I don't have a whole shelf of them is because they're murderously expensive. You sign up to subscription series, and each book ends up costing a lot of money, even when you factor it out over years. So it's always a treat when you find one used, when you find one secondhand that somebody's just given up, and that has somehow managed through all the vagaries of own and get rid of, to end up at the thrift shop where you show up. I don't have a copy of this book. Well, now I do, but I can't wait to reread it. Then the next one is... it follows a theme. There's definitely a theme going on here. I don't know how karma works like this in used books, but I've been finding more and more books on some of the formative presidencies of the 20th century, of the second half of the 20th century, and especially the first President Bush, President George H.W. Bush. Maybe it's not that I'm encountering more of them, maybe it's just that I'm paying more attention. But this is one I remember reading when it first came out and liking it a lot, and then of course it disappeared. It's The General's War by Michael Gordon and General Bernard Traynor, and it's about the Gulf War. And it is iconoclastic to say the least. Nobody comes out clean in this book. Colin Powell gets it the worst, but General Schwarzkopf gets it really bad, and so does the president, for ineptitude and criminality and venality and barbarity. And it's I remember it being not only a revelation in every chapter, but also really good to read, a really good reading experience, which not all histories are, especially contemporary histories. And I would have been happier with a hardcover, but I will definitely take this to reread it, because all I'm doing these days in the off moments is rereading about George H.W. Bush. I hope it's not a premonition that he's going to die. That would be really bad. The next 2 books are linked, and they were next to each other on the shelf, so I assume they were bought together, owned together, and sold together. And they deal with the similar topics. This one is When Plague Strikes, and it is by James Cross Giblin, and it's a study of the Black Death, smallpox, and AIDS. Not just the morphology and the presentation, but also the sociology, how people reacted to them, what social changes, mythologies, folklores, misinformation sprang up all around them. And it's going to be fascinating for me because I've studied each one of these things separately, especially the Black Death and AIDS. The smallpox, not so much, but smallpox actually deserves a lot more study than I've given it. And all 3 of them are fascinating, and I'm be very interested to see what connections this author draws between them and what differences, because that's the whole point of the book. So that has to be what goes on in here, even though it's a little disarmingly short. The text is big, the margins are big. So I have a feeling I'm going to come out of it wishing that it were more comprehensive. But if I want comprehensive when it comes to a disease, the next one will certainly do it. This is a Penguin trade paperback of The Great Influenza by John Barry. His study of the flu pandemic that struck the world in the wake of World War I. Not just its beginnings, not just its rampages when there was hardly any street, let alone city, in the Western world that wasn't afflicted, but also the race against time to fight it, and the eventual victory in that fight. I have this book. I have another copy of it. I don't. I think I got this just because it was basically free. I don't have a hardcover of this book at all, but I have another trade paperback of the Penguin somewhere, and I'd be greatly interested in rereading it. There's another book coming out about the Great Flu in, I think, a month, maybe 2 months. That I don't have it yet, but I have read chunks of an e-galley, and it is really, really good. So I can't wait to read the whole thing, and I'm feeling like I should probably reread this before I do. So I was happy to find the two of them side by side like that. And then the last thing, the last book is indeed, I when I found this and the General's War, I kind of wished that they were both hardcovers. The paperbacks of mine have been tending to fall apart, to break apart more often. I don't know if I'm being rougher with them or if they're just not as well made. But I'm starting to prefer books that I really like in hardcover, and to counteract the crowding of the shelves in Hyde Cottage by liking fewer books, by saying, okay, I don't want to keep these 20, but of those 20, I want to keep this one, but I want it in a hardcover. Same thing with the Thalia books. I want that hardcover one volume. I don't necessarily want paperbacks of any of them. And this next one, the last one that I'll show you, is a book that until now I had only in paperback, and I've gone back to it many times. It's a great book. So I was thrilled to find it for a 50-cent hardcover. And it's this. It's The Creation of Anne Boleyn. It's by Susan Bordeaux, and at first you might think something salacious. The creation of Anne Boleyn happened in about 15 minutes when Mr. and Mrs. Boleyn got together one stormy night. But no, the book, it's a biography of Anne, and it's a study of her brief time in the sun, her brief gaudy hour, as the great old historical novel puts it. But the bulk of the book, the best parts of it, the fascinating parts of it, are about the construction of the idea of Anne Boleyn, not just in her own time, but in the centuries that followed. The construction of who she is, or what history has done with her as an object. And it's absolutely great. It's absolutely great. There's, of course, I'm a big Tudor history fan, but even so, I would say that on a generous-sized bookcase, there aren't more than 2 whole wide shelves of books that you absolutely have to have. And of course, when you're dealing with Tudor history, some of those books have to be about Anne Boleyn, and there's one other, and then there's this. So that's not many. This needs to be on that shelf. So if you see this thing with this very noticeable yellow spine, and you're at all interested in Tudor history, it's well worth your time to do. And I was thrilled to find it in hardcover. And just to walk away with it. So we'll do a little Steve book pile here. There's The Creation of Anne Boleyn. There's The Great Influenza. There's When Plague Strikes. There's The General's War, about the First Gulf War. There's Love in a Cold Climate, in a beautiful folio edition. There's Rumpole and the Penge Bungalow Murders. And there's a UK trade paperback of Duane's Depressed that I got without really thinking. And that I wanted to show you those because they it was an unexpected treat to have books on a Sunday. And as unexpected and wonderful as it was secondary to the how, which has really turned my mind around. It's turned my mood around to have weightlifting lunkheads be such mensches. I won't stress it anymore, but I didn't see it coming. And it really touched me. So, and I don't have to worry about them seeing this, so I can confess it to you. But that's it for now. I will be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.